not born blind. She was not born deaf. She was not born a joke. She was born in Tuscumbia.
Are you sure about that?
She was born in Tuscumbia. I'm sorry?
If Helen Keller fell down in the woods, would she make a sound?
What?
How did Helen Keller burn the side of her face?
She answered the iron.
How did she burn the other side of her face?
It rang again.
What was Helen Keller's favorite color?
Black?
No, corduroy. So, how do you punish Helen Keller?
Let's see. If you happen to have a round room, you could put her in it and tell her to stand in the corner.
Very good.
Thank you. She was born in 1880 in Tuscumbia, Alabama, on a postbellum plantation called Ivy Green. The fair daughter of a Southern belle and a Confederate soldier, she had, they say, keen eyes.
How did her parents punish her?
They were blue. But then in the winter of 1882, when she was just 19 months old, just learning how to talk, she was struck with a fever. Some say it was a scarlet fever, others say it was meningitis. It raged through her little body for 2 weeks, and when it broke, her family rejoiced.
Come on. How did Helen Keller's parents punish her?
But then the doctor told them that their little daughter had been left deaf and blind, and her family mourned.
How did Helen Keller's parents punish her?
They washed her hands out with soap.
Nice. What else?
They, moved the furniture around?
Go on.
No, they really did move the furniture around.
What?
2 inlets of perception cut off from the world. Taste, touch, and smell were all she had to connect her with others. So she invented signs, little imitations of the world in which she lived. She mimed the act of buttering bread, if that was what she wanted, or crawled on the ground, her hands doubled in a fist to show her small slave. I mean, her little black friend. This was after the Emancipation Proclamation. Then it was time to go hunting for guinea fowl eggs in the grass. Now, please let me introduce you to Daniel, my reader. He will read to you from Helen's first and most famous autobiography, The Story of My Life. If you please, Daniel.
In those days, a little colored girl, Martha Washington, the child of our cook, and Belle, an old setter, and a great hunter in her day, were my constant companions. Martha Washington understood my signs, and I seldom had any difficulty in making her do just as I wished. It pleased me to domineer over her, and she generally submitted to my tyranny, rather than risk a hand-to-hand encounter. I was strong, active, indifferent to consequences. I knew my own mind well enough and always had my own way, even if I had to fight tooth and nail for it.
Thank you, Daniel. A mass of impulses, aided or thwarted by others, she grew to be a wild thing without restraint. She snatched the food off of the plates of others at table and flew into violent tantrums when corrected or deterred. She, trapped in a solipsistic infancy, tyrannized over the inhabitants of Ivy Green with her needs and wants. In fact, I hear that more than one relative suggested that they put her into an asylum.
What, a home for retards? Okay, I got one for you. What did Helen Keller name her dog? Okay, fine. You don't like that one. Okay, I got another one for you. Wait. Alright, so why can't Helen Keller drive? Because she's a woman! She's like deaf and blind, but she can't drive because she's a woman!
As a matter of fact, she was a feminist, a suffragette.
A what?
That means right to vote. She was quite a radical, a communist even. She was an anti-war activist, one of the founding members of the ACLU. She was a very smart and politically engaged lady.
So how did she end up performing like a freak on vaudeville?
Well, it's complicated. Many did criticize her for pandering to the masses. Others thought she was being exploited, but she needed the money, and she was one of the highest paid acts on vaudeville.
Oh, I get it. She was a sellout.
You know, it's not that easy to make a living as a deaf-blind woman, even with a degree from Radcliffe, magna cum laude. She didn't want to be a charity case. I mean, Andrew Carnegie offered to pay her pension for the rest of her life, but of course she couldn't possibly accept his money because he was a capitalist pig who, in the course of their interview, threatened to take her over his knee and spank her for her pinko politics, despite the fact that she was a grown woman. So, much more dignified to perform on vaudeville, no? Besides, being on stage gave her the opportunity to educate the masses about workers' rights and the injustices of our capitalist system.
Wow, that sounds like a fun show.
She had jokes too.
Hey, did you hear about the Paralympics plane crash?
The what?
Okay,
Oh,
so there
no.
were these 3 disabled guys, a blind man, a guy in a wheelchair, and an amputee, who were all flying back from the Paralympics games in the Middle East when their plane
As
crashes
she
in the
grew bigger
Sahara
and
Desert.
stronger, her
They
parents
were
began
the
to
only
fear that they
3
really
survivors.
might have to
So
send
they wait around
little
for a
Helen
while
to
for
an
somebody to
asylum.
come rescue them, but nobody shows. So they go out
Helen's
in
mother
search
read
and wait,
Charles
because of course
Dickens'
they're
account
getting
of Laura
real
Bridgman,
thirsty.
the very
Well,
first deaf
the
blind
amputee
person in the
leads the
history
way,
of the
and
world
then
to
the
be
blind guy
educated.
pushes the guy in the wheelchair,
Now,
because of course the blind
Daniel
guy's a nice
will
guy.
read to you from Dickens'
Finally,
American
they
Notes,
spot an
in which he
oasis.
describes his visit
So
with
the
Laura
amputee guy
at
goes
Perkins
in
School.
first. He splashes
This
around, he
passage
drinks water, pulls
inspired
himself
the
up,
Kellers
walks
to
to the
get
other
inducted
side,
to
and
Perkins School when
whoa!
Laura
It's a
had
miracle!
miraculously been taught
No
to
way.
read, write,
Then the blind guy,
and
because he's a
communicate
nice
using
guy,
the
offers
manual
to push the guy in
alphabet.
the wheelchair.
Go on,
But the guy
Daniel!
in the wheelchair is like, hey, I'm Mr. Independent. And so he insists that the blind guy goes first.
Daniel?
So the blind guy goes into the water, he splashes around, he drinks some water, he walks out the other side.
Daniel?
Whoa!
Daniel?
It's a fucking miracle! He can see!
Daniel?
So now, the guy in the wheelchair, he is getting real excited. He pushes himself in the water, he splashes around, he drinks some water, he goes out the other side, and wow! It's a miracle!
Daniel!
New tires! They get new tires!
Long before I looked upon her, the hell had come. Her face was radiant with intelligence and pleasure. Her hair, braided by her own hands, was bound about her head, whose intellectual capacity and development were beautifully expressed in its graceful outline, and its broad open brow. Her dress, arranged by herself,
You mean she dressed herself?
Be quiet! Go on, Daniel.
was a pattern of neatness and simplicity. The work she had knitted lay beside her. A writing book was on the desk she leaned upon. From the mournful ruin of such bereavement, there had slowly risen up this gentle, tender, guileless, grateful-hearted being. Like other inmates of that house, she had a green ribbon bound round her eyelids.
A what?
A doll she had dressed lay near upon the ground. I took it up, and saw that she had made a green fillet such as she wore, and fastened it about its mimic eyes.
Ha! So even blind people don't like to look at blind eyes. But what was Charles Dickens doing visiting some deaf blind chick anyway?
She was famous. Thousands of people went to go and visit Laura at the Perkins School.
You mean they put her on display? Like a freak show?
No, it wasn't like that. It was about progress, about the possibilities of education and science, about humanitarianism and enlightenment.
Uh-huh. So did they charge money?
Not exactly.
But I bet you got lots of donations for that blind school.
Well, yes. But is that really so bad? I mean, that's how they were able to educate Annie Sullivan and send her to the Kellers to rescue their wild child from an irrevocable descent into complete animalistic degeneracy. Ha! child, and though a series of operations did much to restore her vision, she would always have trouble with her eyes.
The blind teaching the blind.
Annie's life had started off much worse than Helen's. She was the daughter of Irish immigrants, whose mother died when she was a child, and whose father was an alcoholic who abused her and her siblings.
Hey, did you hear the one about the Irish guy that went to a private investigator because he'd lost his temper?
So Annie Sullivan, teacher, ended up in an orphanage where she learned early to fight. She was uniquely qualified to tame the tyrant of Ivy Green. As a matter of fact, I hear her methods were a bit, unsound.
Go on.
Well, as Helen herself admits in her autobiography, she was impossible, strong and stubborn, and so teacher often had to resort to physical restraints and other extreme measures in order to subdue the wild child and force a kind of mastery over her.
This sounds interesting.
But it was not easy for a teacher to do her work with Helen's parents scrutinizing her every move, and so finally she convinced them to let her take Helen to live with her in a little cottage far from the main house, and in order to make Helen believe that she was in a totally new place, far from her family, and completely reliant on teacher, they moved
the furniture around.
Yes!
Yes. Oh, my dear. Yes.
That's a lovely story.
But that's just the beginning.
Nope, that's the end of the movie.
But she's only 7 at the end of the movie. And she lives to be 87.
No, she was deaf, dumb, and blind, and she learned how to, quote, talk when she was 7 years old. What else does she have to say for herself?
Every book is, in a sense, autobiographical. But while other self-recording creatures are permitted at least to seem to change the subject, apparently nobody cares what I think about the tariff, the conservation of our natural resources, or the conflicts which revolve about the name of Dreyfus. If I offered to reform the education system of the world, my editorial friends say,
that is very interesting. But would you please tell us what idea of goodness and beauty you had when you were 6 years old?
The editors are so kind that they are no doubt right in thinking that nothing I have to say about the affairs of the universe would be interesting. But until they give me opportunity to write about matters that are not me,
The world must go on uninstructed and unreformed, and I can only do my best with the one small subject upon which I am allowed to discourse.
When I saw Helen Keller first, she was 6 years and 8 months old. She had been blind and deaf and mute since her 19th month as the result of an illness. She had no way of communicating with those around her except a few imitative signs that she had made for herself. A push man's go, a pull man's come, and so on. She had observed that we did not use the hands when we were talking to each other. And I let her see, by putting her hand on my face, how we talk with our mouths. She felt the vibration of the spoken word. Instantly, she spelled, "I want to talk with my mouth." That seemed impossible. But after experimenting for a time, we found that placing her hand in this position, the thumb resting on the throat, right at the larynx, the first finger on the lips, the second on the nose, we found that she could feel the vibration of spoken words. For instance, the throat, she feels the G, the hard G, G. And on the lips, she feels and the K sound, K. On the lips, she feels the B, and with the second finger on the nose, the nasal sounds, the The first word she learned to articulate was the little word "it." With the hand in this position, I made the vowel "I." She spelled it, "I." Then I made the T. She feels it with the finger on her lips, on my lips. Then I put the two letters together to form the word "it," and the first word was learned. After her seventh lesson, she was able to speak the sentence word by word. I am not dumb now.
Going down the avenue, me and my shadow, must over the trouble too. And when it's 12 o'clock, we climb up there, we never knock, for nobody's there, just me and my shadow.
All the world knows and loves Helen Keller, the girl with the unconquerable spirit. She had fought her way uncomplaining against the greatest obstacles that ever confronted a human being. Today, she is the star of happiness to all struggling humanity. Helen can feel the music, not only with her fingertips, but with her whole body.
It is very beautiful.
Miss Keller, can you tell when the audience applauds?
Why, yes, I hear it with my feet, only
Yes.
they are not applauding.
Will you please applaud? Miss Keller,
Yes?
you feel the applause through your feet?
Oh, right.
It is said Miss Keller found her way from her second-floor dressing room to the stage by following the scent of these roses.
That is silly.
Why?
I'm not a dog.
You did rely heavily on your sense of smell.
Oh, whatever. Are you really going to make me say this next bit? I mean, who wrote this shit?
You did.
You think so? Well, maybe, but I bet the Vaudeville producers had a hand in it. It's pretty cheesy.
Just say your lines.
What I have to say is very simple. My teacher has told you how a word from her hand touched the darkness of my mind, and I awoke to the gladness of life. I was dumb, but now I speak, and I owe this to the hands and hearts of others. Through their love, I found my soul and happiness. Don't you see what it means? We live by each other and for each other. Alone we can do so little. Together we can do so much. Love can break down the walls that stand between us and happiness. I lift up my voice and thank the Lord for love and joy and the promise of life to come. Ugh.
Wonderful star of light. Out from the darkness of night. Sending down a silver ray. Turning nighttime into day. Wonderful star of light.
Enough! I hate those lyrics.
Why?
I'm just so sick of this whole quasi-religious, Neoplatonic, light-dark metaphorics that pretends to give credence to the idea of compensation.
Compensation?
You know, metaphorical sight for physical sight, spiritual light for the real thing. I just don't buy it. I mean, seriously, the star of happiness. It's just so saccharine and Pollyannish. It panders to the sap and sentimentality in people.
Oh, but the song was written for you.
Yeah, by the guy who wrote, "Yes, we had no bananas."
What is that?
Hit it, boys!
We have no bananas.
Right.
We have no bananas today. Waiting like peas and onions, got buckets and the scallions, and all kinds of fruit and play. We haven't no bananas. No, I like potato.
Right.
You know, I'm not really Helen Keller.
What's your point?
Well, for one thing, I don't believe in God or the promise of life to come, or that there is meaning in my suffering. And I certainly have no interest in uplifting your spirits or being an inspiration.
Then what do you want to do?
Through performative reading of disparate texts, I'd like to make some bold suggestions that will force my audience to confront their deeply held, if often unconscious, attitudes towards the disabled body.
I think that it is time for Miss Keller to answer some questions from the audience.
Right.
Miss Keller, do you ever tire of talking?
Have you ever heard of a woman who's tired of talking?
Miss Keller, can you enjoy trees?
Yes, they speak to me of the silent works of God.
Do you believe, with Arthur Conan Doyle, that spiritualism is the cure for the world's troubles?
No, I think that the world's troubles are caused chiefly by wrong economic conditions, and the only cure for them is social reorganization.
Do you think women should go into politics?
Yes, if they want to.
Do you think women should hold office?
Yes, if they can get enough of their fellow citizens to vote for them.
What do you think of capitalism?
I think that it has outgrown its usefulness.
What do you think of Harvard College's discrimination against the Jews?
Harvard, in discriminating against the Jew and the Negro on grounds other than intellectual qualifications, has proved unworthy of its traditions and covered itself with shame.
Who are your best pals?
Books.
What is your conception of light?
It is like thought in the mind, a bright, amazing thing.
Miss Keller, do you really perceive colors?
Well, sometimes I feel blue and other times I see red.
Miss Keller, do you close your eyes when you sleep?
I guess I do, and I never stayed awake to see.
What do you think of the Ku Klux Klan?
I like them about as much as I do a hornet's nest.
What do you think of Soviet Russia?
Soviet Russia is the first organized attempt of the workers to establish an order of society in which human life and happiness shall be of prime importance and not the conservation of wealth for a privileged class.
What do you think of President Harding?
Ah, Harding. I have a fellow feeling for him. He seems as blind as I am.
Who are the three greatest men of our time?
Lenin, Edison, and Chaplin.
Does Miss Keller think of marriage?
Why, yes. Are you proposing to me?
Miss Keller, what is your idea of unhappiness?
Having nothing to do.
What is Miss Keller's age?
There is no age on the vaudeville stage.
So why did Helen Keller cross the road?
To, feel the other side?
Freak.
Well, yes, at first it seemed odd to find ourselves on the same bill with acrobats, monkeys, horses, dogs, and parrots, but our little act was dignified and people seemed to like it.
Helen's act was, according to Hammerstein and other vaudeville producers, called an odd act. This was not strictly entertainment, but rather topical, newsworthy, or of human interest.
I found the world of vaudeville much more amusing than the world I'd always lived in, and I liked it. I liked to feel the warm tide of human life pulsing round and round me. I liked to weep at its sorrows, to laugh at its absurdities, to be annoyed by its foibles, to be set athrill by its flashes of unexpected goodness and courage. And I enjoyed watching the actors in the workshop of faces and costumes. If I should to you relate the strength and riches of their state, the powder, the patches and masks, the ribbons and jewels and livery.
That's Abraham Cowley.
You like Abraham Cowley too?
Who doesn't enjoy a bit of bawdy 17th century English poetry every now and again?
And if I should describe the charming bits of acts that were performed for me off stage, I should be more voluminous than who's who in America. I must be content to say that I was often admitted to the dressing rooms of the other actors, and that many of them let me feel their costumes and even went through their acts for me. The thought often occurred to me that the parts the actors played was their real life, and that all the rest was make-believe. I still think so, and I hope that it is true for the sake of many to whom fate is unkind in the real world. I can conceive that in time the spectacle may have grown stale. I might have come to hear the personal confessions of my fellow actors without emotions, and to regard the details of wild parties and excursions with impatience. I will always be glad that I went into vaudeville, not only for the excitement of it, but also for the opportunities it gave me to study life.
That's interesting.
What?
Well, it must be one of the hardest things about being deaf and blind.
What's that?
Not having a lot of opportunities to study life.
Right, not being able to have conversations with people unless it was through an interpreter or basically sitting in the other person's lap.
That's kind of hot.
Yeah. In order to have direct conversation with people, she'd have to put her hands on their faces like this, their thumb and the mouth and the nose hooked up. It was very intimate. Obviously, not everybody felt comfortable getting so close, especially the men. The fact that she had big boobs probably didn't help much. I mean, and making the men feel less awkward.
She had what?
Big boobs.
Really?
Not me, she! Can you excuse me for a minute? I have to, I
It's true that Helen's sexiness did not fit in well with her angelic image, and so her friends, publicists, and all those who had a vested interest in guarding her virginal, saintly appearance did their best to downplay their size in photos. What are you doing?
Changing.
So many of her biographers talk about her body, that she had a very feminine shape, even called her voluptuous sometimes. Hattie Duke, when she was playing Helen in The Miracle Worker on Broadway, went to go and visit the aging Helen in her house in Forest Hills, where they caught Helen hanging her bras on the clothesline to dry, and Hattie notes that they were rather large bras. So did she ever have a boyfriend? Yes, his name was Peter Fagan, and they planned to elope, but it ended badly. I mean, Helen's mother was a serious Southern prude who was horrified at the idea of her disabled daughter's sexuality. So when she found out about their plans, she sent Helen's brothers to run Peter off with guns. But not much is written about this affair, and even Helen seems to grow a little bit embarrassed about it later in her life. So did they ever, do it? I suppose it's possible that they had sex. I mean, Helen was no prude. She had friends who were at the center of the fight for women's reproductive rights, even abortion. But judging from a letter that was written to a suitor when she was 42 years old, I think we can surmise that, however reluctantly, she lived and died a virgin. Hey, could you read that letter for me? I gotta get into character. But I thought you were playing yourself in Act 3. I am, but it's still an act, a performance. real life. Now go on, read that quote. It's a good one. All of the primitive instincts and desires of the heart, which neither physical disabilities nor suppression can subdue, leap up within me to meet your wishes. Since my youth I have desired the love of a man. Sometimes I wonder rebelliously why fate has trifled with me so strangely. Why I was tantalized with bodily capabilities I could not fulfill. But time, the great discipliner, has done his work well, so that I have learned not to reach out for the moon, and not to cry aloud for the spilled treasures of womanhood. I have come to feel that it was intended for me to live as an unmated, and I have become reconciled to my fate. You have knowledge of human nature. You understand the workings of the normal human mind. But I wonder if you know the consequences of the triple affliction of blindness, deafness, and imperfect speech. You have read my books. Perhaps you have received the wrong impression from them. One does not grumble in print or hold up one's broken wings for the thoughtless and indifferent to gaze at. One hides as much as possible one's awkwardness and helplessness behind a fine philosophy and a smiling face. What I have printed gives no knowledge of my actual life. You see and hear, and therefore cannot easily imagine how complicated life is when one has to be led everywhere and assisted to do the simplest things. Somehow your letter has made me acutely aware of my situation and its discomforts. I realize, as perhaps you cannot, the almost unthinkable difference between your life and mine. You seem to have lived a full, normal man's life. I have lived inwardly. They say that all women partake of the nature of children. I am absurdly childish in many ways. My nearest friends tell me that I know nothing of the real world. In some ways, my life has been a very lonely one. Books have been my most intimate companions. My part in domestic affairs is usually that of a wistful looker-on. Your willingness to marry me under the circumstances fills me with amazement. I tremble to think what an inescapable burden I should be to a husband. I told you that time had done its work well, and that I no longer cry for the spilled treasures of womanhood. I did not mean to imply by this observation a forced and melancholy resignation. Through the wise, loving ministrations of my teacher, Mrs. Anne Sullivan Mason, who, since my earliest childhood, has been a light to me in all dark places, I faced consciously the strong sex urge of my nature and turned that life energy into channels of satisfying sympathy and work. I never dreamed of suppressing that God-given creative impulse. I simply directed the whole force of my life energy to the accomplishment of difficult tasks and the service of others less fortunate than myself. Consequently, I have led a happy and, I hope, useful life.
You're listening to an avant accordion brain smash, produced and performed by Leona Godin. That's Godin, as in Rodin. It's French, so fuck off and listen. All right, enough of that. I am a doctor of philosophy, so don't get sick. And as such, I teach literature at a certain university in the New York area, which shall remain nameless since it's been known to gobble up much of the real estate in the downtown area. So at this certain New York university, oops! I teach a class called Conversations of the West, in which we read certain representative texts of the antiquity and the Renaissance. Now, I have very few things in common with those future bloodsuckers and the students that I have, but we all seem to agree that The Prince by Machiavelli is a great book. Any fans of The Prince out there? Yay! Yay! Well, it doesn't really matter. This song I'm about to perform for you this evening is inspired by a passage in The Prince in which Machiavelli extols the excellencies of a prince named Cesare Borgia, who's the bastard son of, oh, I don't know, Pope Alexander VI or VII, it doesn't matter. In any case, he uses this really bad dude named Ramiro de Orco to do his dirty work. I call him Dorco, and this is his song. This is Dorco. Here we go. Everything he said, so his enemy's throat sliced open more than one head. In the end, I'm afraid I was the one who's despised. I let the people suddenly satisfied. Oh yeah. Legend has it. Oh shit! I forgot to tell you something. So I don't want to offend you any more than I have to. And there's kind of this. There's a raping that happens in this next verse, but it's a metaphor, okay? It's a metaphorical raping, and I also don't know how good your Latin is, so here's the thing. So for Machiavelli, he calls the prince virtuous very often, and so virtue comes from the word vir, V-I-R. Anybody Latin out there? Yes. Man, that's right. So for Machiavelli, the virtuous prince is the manly, powerful prince. And occasion, you've heard this expression, seize the occasion. So occasion was often depicted as a naked nymph running very quickly, which would be hot, except that she's got this crazy forelock of hair that's coming out of the top of her head. It's the idea that the virtuous prince will seize occasion by the forelock and rape her into submission. Well, it's just a metaphor. Legend has it, my prince seized occasion and raped her till she squealed with submission. When you're under a prince with such a virtue, it's not hard to feel stunned and satisfied. Oh yeah, satisfied. Our prince went to unite all those bastards. Son of the Pope is the biggest bastard of them all. We all knew he had help. Someone had to be sure. Someone had to feel stunned and satisfied. Oh yeah, stunned and satisfied. This song is dedicated to my dictator. Bastard. Glory, I raped and pillaged some towns. Women and children, yeah, they got in my way. But once you get to town, they got pissed at my plans. I got to feel stunned and satisfied. Oh yeah, you get the people strong and satisfied. Still they called out for vengeance, and they asked for some justice. Judges and clowns, it would not let me go free, and my prince needed a scapegoat. Who better than me? Never got to feel stunned and satisfied. Oh yeah. So 2 halves of my body, with one bloody knife, were placed neatly on a block in the middle of town square. The scene set the stage for the drama to end, for it left the people stunned and satisfied.
Oh, it's so hard to be an intelligent woman. It's also really hard to be blind. You know, people expect you. They have such high expectations for you. They expect you to be some sort of a poet like Homer, or a prophet like Tiresias, or at the very least not to be distracted by superficialities. Do I look fat? Anyways, especially there's old, ugly, fat, balding dudes out there that have these kinds of high expectations, you know? When they meet me, I can practically see their little brains working. Because of course I do have a touch of the clairvoyance, as do all of my people. So these old, ugly, fat, balding dudes, when they meet me, they're like, ah, finally a woman who will love me for who I am on the inside. No, you're going to have to do better than that, Mr. Old, Ugly, Fat, Balding Dude. You might have to find yourself an old, ugly, fat, balding woman to appreciate you for who you are on the inside. Not that I'm talking to any of you, because y'all laugh thin and with hair. So I've thought about this a lot, and I realized that sex is the great equalizer. You know, I don't feel my disability when I'm in bed with somebody. I don't feel like a blind person. Unless I get mixed up with some freak. Some freaky freak with a fetish for eye contact. So, people ask me all the time, Professor, Dr. Godin, how do you do all of your reading? Well, you guys have a little bit of insight into that. You've heard Daniel, my very charming Brit computer voice, who reads to me all of my books. And admittedly, it's not that easy to stay awake all the time, so it's really helpful to do something with my hands when I'm listening to a book. A lot of times I knit or sew. But the other day for Conversations of the West, I was reading a little bit of the Old Testament, and despite the fact that there's lots of blind people in there, it's pretty slow going, I must admit. So I had to try something new, so I masturbated. Which worked like a charm. I mean, I didn't fall asleep. But that's really naughty. Masturbating while listening to the Bible. But what's he gonna do? What are you gonna do, God? You gonna make me go blind? Well, you're too late. Genetics beat you to it. And speaking of God, here's my advice to you, my future henchmen out there. When you serve a frenzied, ferocious lie, whose head revolves murder, but there's none allowed to you to why you're firing and wearing if there's blood on your hands. Or you have a knowledge of the sun and satisfied. Oh yeah, you get the people sun and satisfied. I was born with a progressive eye disease called retinitis pigmentosa. This means that for most of my life I've been going very, very slowly blind. I have always existed somewhere on that vast continuum between normal sight and total blindness. That final darkness terrifies me. I bet for many of you, not all of you, but many of you, going blind is one of the scariest things you can think of, and for me, it's losing another sense, especially my hearing. When I started reading books on and by Helen, I developed this ringing in my ear. Sure, it could have been psychosomatic. It wouldn't be the first psycho symptom I've ever exhibited. But real or not, it inspired a dream, a nightmare. I was Helen in the last
last years of her life, when she was confined to bed by old age illness, we were insensible to sights and sounds as ever, but now we lacked that incessant impulsive force that had launched her, a crazy deaf-blind caterpillar, feelers electrified and electrifying meteorically into a world that could not get enough of her and of which she also could not get enough. After living nearly 90 years of a life that included such varied occupations as political activist, vaudeville performer, and after World War II, after America dropped bombs, etc., she became an officially sanctioned, unofficial ambassador of American peace and goodwill. 2 million Japanese came out to visit her. 2 million Japanese came out to welcome her when she visited the decimated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They loved her that much. But my dream took place in a time past all that, so that I experienced for the first time what it might feel like to have a sensory existence that extended no farther than the cocoon-like bedding in which I was wrapped. Accepting the slight tremors and vibrations coming up from the floor, or the occasional touch of an attending hand. There, political activist, vaudeville performer. But in the double-visioned way dreams sometimes unfold, I was both trapped in her immobility with her and seeing her inert body from the outside. The perspective was split. The in-body perspective was that of the cornered small animal, trembling with the desire to escape. That of the suddenly quadriplegic wishing impotently to die. That of the tongueless victim left alone to tell her tale, while the out-of-body perspective was that of the achingly detached observer, the nonsensical buzzing fly, the sole audience at a wake. And from this latter perspective, the bed on which we lie appears in my mind's eye to be a tabula rasa. Was and our body an aching, and our body a lumpy virgin landscape. But that was my nightmare, not Helen's. Helen believed that there was a fully sensing, eternal, and heavenly body waiting for her to step into after death. And she said, I seldom think of my limitations, and they never make me sad. Perhaps there is just a touch of yearning at times, but it is vague like a breeze amongst flowers. She said, there was. My teacher has told you how a word from her hand touched the darkness of my mind, and I awoke to the gladness of life. Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. It gives me a great comforting sense that things things unseen are eternal. She said, everything has its wonders, there's darkness and silence, and I learned whatever state I may be in, therein to be content.
If Helen Keller fell down in the woods, would she make a sound?
I seldom think of my limitations.
I was strong, active, indifferent to consequences. I knew my own mind well enough and always had my own way, even if I had to fight tooth and nail for it.
But it is vague like
I am not dumb now.
Till our ears hear the voices of humanity. Together we can do so much.
Every one of us is
It gives me a great
comforting sense of liberty to be mentally, spiritually, untrampled by tradition and arbitrary standard. It is not required that there is darkness to do or be something great. Most of us must be contented to take small parts in the drama of life. It is not required.
I was strong, active, indifferent to consequences. I knew my own mind well enough and always had my own way, even if I had to fight tooth and nail for it.
But it is vague like
I am not dumb now.
told you how a word from her hand touched the darkness of my mind. Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. It gives me a great comforting sense that things
to consequences. I mean, my own mind, whether or not